I'm Julia Williams, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about some teaching tips for when you are teaching English for academic purposes. One of the challenges I've had in the past when I've been teaching EAP, or English for academic purposes, is that it's very difficult to get away from the product approach to writing. And you probably know the distinction between the product and the process approach. If you have a product approach to writing, you assign an assignment or an essay or a report or some kind of written task. Let's say written. It could also be speaking as well. But you assign some kind of a task, students do that, you evaluate it, and then you move on to the next one. And so each time you're evaluating the single product, the outcome of that student's effort, and you're just looking at it once, and then it's done, and then you're moving on to something else. That's the product approach to writing. We can contrast this with the process approach to writing, which looks at multi-drafting of assignments. And in a lot of second language learning, we've moved in that direction because we know students benefit from getting feedback on their writing and being asked to rewrite. They generally are able to improve their writing that way. So we often multi-draft, and so the process writing approach then is reiterative. It encourages students to brainstorm. We start with brainstorming, drafting, doing initial, perhaps an outline of what the student hopes to write, and then there's an initial draft. There's some feedback on that, either a peer feedback or from the teacher, and then they would produce a second draft, and then perhaps there's editing. Again, could be from a peer, could be from the teacher. And then finally there's a final draft. And then you evaluate that final draft, which is the culmination of a longer period of effort and student attention focused on that particular writing product. So that is what we would call the writing process approach. Often in an EAP environment, you are pressed for time because there's so much to teach your students. And one thing about the process approach to writing is that it can be very time consuming. And so one of the things that I like to do when I'm in an EAP context and I'm trying to promote a process approach to writing is to start with a small assignment. That's my first assignment, is a smaller assignment, and followed up very quickly by a bigger assignment that requires them to reuse the content or the organizational structure or the grammar structure that they used in their earlier assignment. So, for example, you may begin your writing class with something in the first person, allowing students to get comfortable with writing about something they know best. That would be a good small first assignment, and then you might move them to an academic perspective on that same topic and ask them to write a little bit extended response there and change their earlier assignment from a first person to a third person to have them understand the feel between using the first person and moving to a more academic and objective viewpoint. You may also be able to do this kind of a small assignment, big assignment, where you get students to reuse work from their smaller assignment. You may be able to do that in other ways. So, for example, you may be able to ask students to write a paraphrase of something, and then that would be their initial small assignment, and you can evaluate that paraphrase and give them feedback on that. And then your bigger assignment, which rapidly follows, would be for them to incorporate that paraphrase into a longer essay or a longer report. And so that, in a way, builds in multiple views, multiple opportunities to rewrite into the longer assignment without having to go through a full multi-draft process type writing that you might find in other contexts. So that's one thing you can look for in a textbook. Look for a textbook that has a warm-up assignment in about mid-unit, and that is followed by a final assignment at the end of the unit, and the final assignment requires students to reuse the work that they've produced in their warm-up assignment. So that's a nice structure there, and textbooks can facilitate that process approach to writing. Another useful thing to think about when you're teaching in an EAP environment is that you really want to push your students to learn as much vocabulary as possible. And with the fantastic research that Avril Cox had produced in the year 2000, I think it was, she produced the academic word list. So not only do we know it's important for students to learn a lot of vocabulary, but we even know which words it's most useful for students in academic contexts to learn. And so you should, again, look for that in the textbooks that you're using. You want to see a textbook that has a targeted approach to the academic word list words and multiple opportunities for students to use those words. Students need lots of opportunity to practice and to use vocabulary in order for it to move from short-term to long-term memory and for them to retain it. So look for textbooks then that provide multiple opportunities for students to practice their vocabulary. One way of providing students with multiple opportunities to use vocabulary is to twin the content, the topics of different chapters. So if you have two chapters back to back that are on relatively similar topics, not identical because that might get a little boring, but on relatively similar topics, then students are able to reuse vocabulary that they've learned in the first unit and move it into the second. So for example, if you've been doing some work on, let's say the first chapter is all about marketing and the second chapter is about branding, clearly those are both business topics and students can use a lot of the vocabulary and the collocations they learn across both of those units. So look for that in a textbook when you're assessing textbooks that you'd like to use.